Hi, welcome to Week in Review, where we look at some of the headlines making news this week and talk with some of the staff here at the Oklahoman about some of the stories they're working on. Big news on a lot of fronts this weekend. I'm joined today by senior reporter Nolan Clay. From sports, we've got Darnell Mayberry, and of course my friend, business editor Don Mikoy. A lot of stuff going on. Let's start with the big news out of the state superintendent, school superintendent's office. Joy Hofmeister charged with campaign contribution violations.
Yeah, it's been 2 years in the making. The DA's been working on it. They did a bunch of interviews this summer, including with Superintendent Hofmeister, and then they filed the charge yesterday late and accused her of campaign violations and accused her of conspiracy, 2 counts of conspiracy, all felonies. And she's basically accused of colluding with a nonprofit that was supposed to be independent, but prosecutors said it wasn't, so that any contributions that went to this dark money group, they're counting against her. So it's pretty serious. She had a news conference last night, didn't take any questions, but said she's going to fight this, and so we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, and this is what the big issue has been in politics lately, with the issue of the unencumbered money from groups that can fund anybody, and that the distinction has to be that it can't be coordinated essentially by the candidate, that unregulated, unchecked money can flow into a campaign as long as the candidate themselves aren't involved in the discussions about how it's going to be spent or used, essentially,
well,
right?
That's why you see on television ads, political ads, that I approve this message, it's the candidate's message, and on others you see that may be for or against, say, Trump, but they're put out by some group that supposedly has nothing to do with Trump and not supposed to have anything to do with Trump. But
and the 2 big groups who are behind the money are, again, who?
Well, it's the Oklahoma Education Association, and the other group is a Cooperative Council for Oklahoma School Administration. Basically, they're two of the education groups here in Oklahoma, and they supposedly each put $100,000 plus $50,000 that each had gotten from an insurance company, for a total of $300,000 into this dark money group to fund a negative ad against Janet Barisi, who was the incumbent and who ended up losing.
And so what's the next step? They've been charged. She'll have to make an appearance? Is that
well,
the next?
They have to, typically, when defendants are like this, they're somewhat high profile, their attorneys will call and arrange for them to be surrendered to the jail. And if a bail's been arranged, they'll post bail or maybe an OR, own recognizance, and they'll just do a walkthrough through the jail where they have to get fingerprinted and have a mug shot taken. That process will be done, and it doesn't have to be done today. It may be in the next few days, but that's the next step.
And there were a couple others involved in that were also charged besides the Joy Hofmeister.
Well, it's the 2 former officials with these education groups we mentioned, and Fount Holland, who is one of the most powerful political consultants in the state, helps lots of Republicans. He and his companies have made millions of dollars over the years. And Stephanie Milligan, who is helping Trump. And so there's 5 in all.
And then I thought one other kind of interesting, fascinating aspect of this story that you mentioned today was this is all grew out of the issue involving Chad Alexander, another political consultant who ran afoul of the law.
Well, at the time, he was a powerful political consultant also, and a lobbyist, and he had admittedly now he had a drug problem. He got pulled over for cocaine during a traffic stop. Police seized his laptop and cell phones as part of the drug investigation, and they were going through that, and they found some suspicious things that were suspicious to them, political-wise, and they notified the DA, and the DA went and got a search warrant to look specifically at those, and off we go.
Is there any indication that there was anything else on that laptop that may have implicated any other political figures in the state?
Well, the short answer is yes, and maybe not in wrongdoing, but in questionable activity, and maybe that'll come out through this process.
Great. Well, we'll keep an eye out for that. It's a fascinating story. Even in the sports world, we're still a little bit in the courtroom this weekend. We've got a lot of stuff going on in sports. We have OU playing without Joe Mixon. We've got the Golden State Warriors playing with Kevin Durant. And then we've got a little bit of a roster shakeup on the Thunder. Let's start with Mixon. Got in a little bit of trouble this week. Didn't play last night. What happened?
We got a random press release, I think it was late Monday night, from OU, the OU athletic department, saying Joe Mixon has been suspended for Thursday's game at Iowa State. And there was a random quote from Joe Mixon in there saying he didn't handle an issue with a parking attendant properly, and he accepted responsibility for those actions. OU head coach Bob Stoops decided to suspend him for Thursday's game at Iowa State. His attorney, Joe Mixon's attorney, saying that Joe Mixon basically ripped up a parking ticket and threw it on the ground in front of the parking attendant. Who among us hasn't wanted to do that at some point when we got a parking ticket? But it seemed like, unless there's more to that story, it seemed like it was much ado about nothing. But Bob Stoops, and given Joe Mixon's history, couldn't afford to just let it slide, and therefore the suspension.
And interesting issues about that Barry raised in his column this week about some of the, the crossing of people who are involved in Joe Mixon's defense, and how the coaching staff and wives of coaching staff members and the connections of the prosecutor in the case going to school with some of those people. And it was just an interesting mixture of questions surrounding the whole handling of Joe Mixon and the issues he's had at OU.
And they're starting to pile up a little bit. I mean, even though the parking attendant issue doesn't seem like a big deal, his attorney is saying that they are fully under the impression that there was no criminal activity whatsoever. So things are still piling up, though. Once you do something like you did in 2014 when he got into the altercation at the restaurant, you're on thin ice, and Joe Mixon should be aware of that and should know that he needs to keep his nose clean at this point. But it is certainly bizarre.
You wonder if he's damaging some of his pro prospects if he, continues, even if they're small.
Our OU writer Ryan Aber has had NFL scouts, at least one NFL scout, reach out to him and ask him about Joe Mixon's past and particularly what's on that video and how bad that video is, which obviously we know it still hasn't been released to the public. So the NFL is watching, and they're watching closely.
Okay, so then last night the Thunder travels west and has their first encounter with, I guess, now their arch nemesis?
It seems to be that way. Kevin Durant put on a show. I mean, 39 points. It was the most he scored, I think, in about 2 years in a regular season game. The Thunder didn't have an answer for him. Kevin Durant was the Thunder's answer for guys like Kevin Durant, and now that he's gone, I mean, they had guys like the newcomer Joffrey Laverne on him, Anthony Morrow, Jeremy Grant. They just threw a bunch of different guys at him. Andre Robertson started on him, but they don't have an answer for him, and that's what made that game probably a little tougher to take if you're a Thunder fan, because not only did he rip your heart out, but now he's destroying you on the court, and that was just tough to see if you're a Thunder fan.
And of course, the other thing that was a big storyline there was the interaction that Kevin Durant would have with his old running partner, Russell Westbrook. What transpired there?
Well, everyone wanted to see how they would greet each other, if they would greet each other before the game, just before tip-off. Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook claimed that they were sort of like brothers for the 8 years that they played together. Didn't really feel like that before the game. They ignored each other. They ignored each other before the tip-off. They ignored each other during the game. They ignored each other after the game. Not a word was spoken, at least publicly, between the two. And they downplayed it, but it just didn't seem like there was a lot of love there anymore. It seems like they're in a real bad place in terms of their relationship. And it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here now, because it seems like Kevin Durant's decision really fractured that relationship.
Chillier than a presidential debate. And then we've got a new member of the Thunder.
Yeah, Jeremy Grant. I mentioned him a minute ago. He's an athletic guy, about 6'8". He's wearing number 9. He kind of looks like Serge Ibaka, who they traded on draft night. If you weren't wiser about things, you would think it is Serge Ibaka the way he's playing. I mean, he's rebounding, he's blocking shots, he's really athletic. Not all that skilled in terms of shooting the ball and making plays for himself or others, but he's an athletic guy. He can probably defend multiple positions as time goes on and he gets comfortable. So it's just another minor piece for this Thunder team as they look to try to rebuild after the departure of Kevin Durant.
I'm going to turn to Don. Don, you happy with that trade?
Sure. Yeah. he dunked on KD. He posterized KD. It was probably the high point of the game for Thunder fans because things really went downhill fast right after that play. So, yeah.
Okay. So, earnings this week out of the energy industry, right?
Yeah, it's earnings season, and our big energy companies here in Oklahoma City, Devon, Chesapeake, and Continental Resources all had their earnings report this week. And we saw some of what we have been seeing ever since oil prices collapsed about 2 years ago, which was, for the most part, we saw losses. But we're starting to see a change in the tone of things. Now, Devon actually made a profit for the first time in 2 years. They posted a quarterly profit. That was boosted by the fact that they sold a bunch of assets during the third quarter, so that really helped their bottom line. But they made a profit. A profit's a profit, so they were profitable. Chesapeake lost about $1 billion. Continental Resources lost about $100 million. But what we were hearing from the executives of these companies when they were talking to analysts, and also you could kind of read between the lines in these earnings statements, is some optimism. We've seen oil prices land above $50 for the first time since 2014, and that is these companies have stripped down. They've laid off people. They've laid down drilling rigs. They're only drilling the very best places where they can get production, and they've gotten really efficient. So oil has gotten to a price point where they can be profitable. So we're seeing some optimism. They're saying that, Devon said basically, for every dollar the price of oil goes up, that means $200 million in incremental revenue for us. So a dollar shift at this point is just more and more and more profit. And we also, our energy editor, Adam Wilmoth, sat down with Harold Hamm this week, and he wrote a story for Sunday, a couple of stories. And Harold's always optimistic about oil, but he talked about the global market and the changes, what he sees as the decline in influence of OPEC, the bright future he sees for domestic oil production. So we're seeing a kind of optimism we haven't seen since the price collapsed.
What's the anticipation for the price of oil, though? I mean, is it really expected to go up significantly in the near term?
That's what these people are telling us. Now, that's what they want to see happen, of course. But Harold Hamm, who's a key energy advisor for Donald Trump, some people have even speculated he could end up being, in his executive staff somehow and continue to act if Trump wins the election. He sees the prices continuing to rise and going out a couple of years, $60 oil, maybe $70 oil, and that production would just ramp up. Now, that's what they want to have happen. Oil people tend to be optimistic, but for the first time in quite a while, there's some reason for that optimism.
Yeah, I mean, if you're only losing $1 billion, I mean, things must be on the upswing.
Now, let me say this about Chesapeake, though. They did lose $1 billion, but in the last couple of years, they have really cleaned up a pretty messy balance sheet. They had huge levels of debt, billions and billions of dollars of debt, and they have paid that down. They still owe billions of dollars, but it's much more manageable than it was before. When Aubrey McClendon was running the company, he bought leasehold everywhere. They owned more assets than anybody. They were the biggest driller in the country. They've contracted that a little bit. It's much more manageable now. The analysts who follow the company and investors both seem to be liking the way that they're kind of downsizing the company and making it more focused in the current climate.
And it sounds like we're going to be reading more about that this coming weekend.
You really should.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's another reason why you need to pick up your Oklahoman, why you want to check in at newsok.com. It's great insight, great content. You can't get it anywhere else. We look forward to you being a subscriber, being a viewer. Check us out. I think you'll really enjoy it. Guys, thanks for being here again this week. Nolan, Darnell, Don. We'll see you again next week. Thanks.